sure I have your attention, boy. You're about to see something wonderful. Whoa. Fuck!
Even though, objectively, I can say that this moment wasn't that scary, it blew me away the first time I played. Hello everyone, my name is Ryan, and I have opinions on Resident Evil and the horror of perspective. I am a huge Resident Evil fan. I've been playing since 4 came out on GameCube, and have had my ups and downs with the series, as all the fans have, over the years. Ever since Resident Evil 7 though, I have been completely immersed in the series again, as it truly revitalized the series after the pratfall that was RE6. Ironically, it did this by introducing a new and controversial paradigm to the core mechanics, the first-person perspective. Many people hated the shift to what seemed to be an imitation of standard FPSs when the game was first announced. And even after release, when these fears were unfounded as the game did not veer heavily into first-person shooter action, it was still met with mixed results. Many hardcore fans heavily criticized the perspective switch, claiming that RE7 was no true Resident Evil game, which, to me, as a fan, was odd, because not only did the change save the franchise from the direction it had been heading, the shakeup actually brought the game closer to the original games than ever before. To start off, I do have to admit I've never played the first games in their original format, as I only became aware of the franchise when I picked up an old copy of 4 on the GameCube. I loved the game, and when I was done started looking for the earlier entries, but as a dumb kid, didn't understand why I could only find Resident Evil 1 on the GameCube as well. Eventually, I did play Resident Evil 5 and RE6, which left a bad taste in my mouth that wasn't rinsed until I gave Revelation, a spin-off game, a try. I have since played all the remakes, making me have every numbered title, in some form or another, under my belt. And I have to say, I prefer the smaller survival puzzle games to the faster-paced action ones. This is really odd considering that Resident Evil 4 is more like the latter than the former. I know, bad-mouthing everyone's favorite installment of the franchise is probably not the wisest move to make friends. But remember, I started out on 4. I love the game, and it's what set me down the path to being a lifelong fan. But if you compare it to the franchise as a whole, it shares a lot more similarities with the underwhelming RE5 and 6. Plus, it was the first instance of the franchise changing up the perspective format, going from fixed camera angles to third-person over the shoulder. This change can be seen as the start of Resident Evil veering more towards the action-adventure games that they came to be by the time 6 rolled around, as opposed to the survival horror puzzle games that the originals were. Resident Evil 7 is a return to form of the original game's mechanics in several ways, from the more cramped and mysterious setting, the constant backtracking to areas, to the more puzzle-oriented ways of progressing. However, it is the change of perspective that I think not only truly brings the game back to the tone of the first games, but also elevates and evolves the horror and spirit of the franchise. A big draw of Resident Evil 1 through 3 was the level design and how it presented Resident Evil's world to you. Through this, the fixed camera perspective of the first games was amazing, as many times it created a creepy and tense atmosphere via the information it provided and sometimes even withheld from the players. Many times throughout the RE remake, you can see shadows looming, enemies reflected in mirrors, or just generally hear what may be a potential foe in a room that presents you with a poor angle for visibility. In this way, the perspective is used as a tool to heighten the fear a player feels. In the third-person games, the only times things like that are attempted are in a few fake-outs in the remakes of 2 and 3, or, and this is stretching it, but is the only thing I could think of from Resident Evil 4, the boulder chasing moments that flip the perspective to have the character and the object hurtling towards the camera. RE7, on the other hand, really tries to utilize the limited perspective of first person to draw the player in. Sure, the game uses some of the aforementioned techniques, such as limiting visibility and using audio cues of unseen enemies. What they do differently though is make the player watch scenes from a disturbing and intimate lens. Many times a grievous wound will be inflicted upon the main character, Ethan Winters, that you then experience in a first-person perspective almost as though it's happening to you. Limbs get cut off, and instead of seeing some other individual try to get a leg sewn back on, you see yourself fumble and try to reattach the missing limb. It really makes it feel as though the events are happening to the player itself. Another way they utilize this technique is in instances like the opening clip I played, where something from outside of frame suddenly invades the player's space. Many scenes have you thinking that you're safe, only for it to be ripped out from under you and have you placed back in peril again. Nothing new for video games in general, but in first-person perspective, especially the way RE7 and 8 have antagonists that fully envelop the view range, it can feel invasive and claustrophobic. The first time Jack grabs you after you're sure 100% you've put him down, I was freaking out. On one hand, because I had already written his character off as the first boss overcome and was feeling safe, and on the other hand, because the back of my mind was anticipating that second phase to the fight. When the scene ended and I was left just standing there, I felt shaken by two expectation swerves. It was then that I knew that there was something special about Resident Evil 7, and I'm so glad that RE8 followed in its footsteps, despite heavy criticism of the first-person's perspective switch. With the quality of the RE remakes, I do believe that there is still a place for third-person Resident Evil games, but it cannot be doubted that Resident Evil 7's first-person's perspective provided the much-needed change-up to revitalize the stagnating franchise. Here's hoping that they find a nice balance between the two different perspectives with their mainline games and all the spin-offs that they can possibly do.